My name is Galia, and I'm from the Institute for International Security and Emergency Situation. This institute is based in Slovakia. However, we are mainstreaming ideas about security and resilience of the society and political parties and also different ministries all around Europe in reality and around the globe. We are focused on development of planning and policy tools, also training of first responders and any other voluntarily based parties and actors. And also we are in certain projects, we are also focused on development of robust technologies. By this, I would like to say that it was very interesting for me to listen and to follow all these presentations of different companies. Maybe I can send a presentation for our solution for detection of illegal production of drugs and explosives, which is also meant for first responders. And also we are right now in the process of development of e-tool, electronic tool that can facilitate the preparedness and planning of decision makers on community and city, metropolitan or municipal level, middle level strategic planning experts, how to assess in advance their needs in investment in technology, knowledge, capacity, mapping, and different software solutions that enable them to gain early warning on any disasters or to be prepared to face and to challenge the negative impacts and vulnerability of different disasters. It's quite similar to what the colleague who finished the first morning session was mentioning about. Of course, it's very impressive what they have been achieved, and I fully agree with that company. I don't remember exactly the name, but this is maybe the future that each decision makers on local level, that they invest in reality in such kind of tools to better prepare or even to better manage and situations when they happen. We have within a network called CRISPRO, we have collected from about 40-50 responders answers on the potential trends within the 20-25 years, trends in multi-hazards and risks related to multi-hazards. So we have assessed that we can go on the first slide. We focus on the multi-hazards because modern societies are profiled with reduced security level, and also it requires cross-sectoral cooperation on global trends, and transferable forms of violation of communicable diseases are also quite well linked to social media, citizen mobilization, awareness. So we have different hazards induced by technological, industrial life, or natural factors in combinations with technological development and social viability of our societies. Because we are more and more interconnected, and the cascading effects cannot be considered as not important. Contrary, we think that in the future, whatever kind of tools are developed for the decision makers, all these tools, or the first responders in terms of their processes and organization of work or investment or planning and better redistribution of sources, it's obligatory to take into consideration the cascading effect. So I guess that even the presenter before me, she she was mentioning exactly that improvement of the functionalities of their software that will focus exactly on the cascading effect and combination of different drivers and different scenarios. We can go on the next slide. We consider as main drivers like smartening of the systems and new technologies that augment the impact, exposure, and multiplication, and cause also non-linear effects. So these are the effects that sometimes it's quite difficult to expect them and to predict them. And then we have also as a driver how reliable is the information or lack of structured data. This is something that people who are working in hazard mapping and planning and preparedness, they know that data today are extremely important for development of any planning. And then also the lack of economic, financial, and community resources. It's very important for the multi-hazards risk assessment. We can go to directly, because we'll not have a lot of time. We can go to directly to the slide why it's important to valorize and capitalize on a practical experience. What we have done so far within the network, that we try to benchmark practical experience in terms of vulnerability, in terms of circumstances, level, and three levels: level of reaction, level of recovery, and the resilient level. So it's important, according to us, to valorize and capitalize on practical experience that the natural and climate change related hazards, they have a widespread impact on the critical infrastructure. That's why it's very important to grow different benchmarking indices and categories based on real cases that have happened. Then the personnel is usually not adequately equipped. It happened, and I see that most of the companies presenting their technologies in the morning session, they are in fact going to support and better foster the first responders or whatever safety and security managers that have any need of technology, either software or robust technology, hardware. Then we have a lot of ad hoc arrangements that are adopted on the very event of something, and sometimes it results in operational problems, and it's due to lack of coordination between the response and level of process and planning categorization of different operations. So sometimes it's not possible to react fast because there's different administrative problems. And we consider as very important to valorize also the any ad hoc leadership communication that can create confusion at the operational level. If we have duplication of the systems, which by this we mean that it's very important that planning and in terms of disaster risk management and disaster risk reduction and resilience should be definitely done in a cross-sectoral manner, not only multi-hazard, but also cross-sectoral manner. It means that in case of any emergency, that we don't concise to have two parallel or even three parallel systems working based on their own separate standard operational procedures, and then to get into a kind of a cul-de-sac and an impossibility to react fast. We have developed a benchmarking approach as an effort to use the benchmarking in the project network multi-hazards risk assessment context, and then to establish a model to benchmark disaster risk reduction and disaster risk management in terms of pre-selected between 4 and 5 categories of expected multi-hazards events in a long-term perception, and also to use historical data, earmarking of extraordinary events. The subject of the benchmarking is, next slide, sorry. The subject of the benchmarking includes practically 4 essential characteristics: the judicial power concerning the organizations and their positioning in the processes of mitigating any emergency situations. Then we have operational capacity and technological advantages, as well as political mandate. These are very important aspects of when working on the benchmarking activities. The purpose is to map the simultaneous, cascading, and even disconnected but temporarily subsequent hazards or threats that complicate organizational response. Also, our idea is to identify the interdependency of modern threats and risks, to examine the challenges in the context of community response, and to outline the practical experience in different organizations, and to map recent threats and disasters related to societal challenges, including technology and IoT hybrid threats. As a universal definition, we also follow that general description that the benchmarking is the process of identifying, understanding, and adapting outstanding practices from organizations anywhere in the world to help an organization improve its performance. In our case, we consider organization not as an institution, but organization as a organization of the whole process of response, recovery, and preparedness and prevention in the DRM. It's important to define what is it. It's an ongoing procedure. It can be a tool, and it can be a control approach. It measures, assess, advances, searches for, and learn about products, services, performances, and practices. Then we follow another question: to whom was it evaluated? We made comparison in best. It's not world leaders, but we use our partners. We consider them that our leaders in our consortium and our network. And then we also anticipated results to attain better performance, content, and apply the knowledge. What we have done, that we collected case studies, and that's why we consider that the first phase is the case study benchmarking process. It's the first stage when we assess the vulnerabilities, impacted functionalities of the societal systems, strategic infrastructure, and changes triggered in communities and emergency response systems. And our approach was split into 6 steps: to define the purpose, identification of disaster management aspects, design the assessment framework, then define indicators and scoring framework, to collect case studies, and definition of the CRISPRO, finally benchmarking threshold based on the exercise, which follows in the first step. We improve the ability of government, civil society organizations, and private sector to plan, implement effective and efficient actions to reduce the vulnerability to natural, technological, and human triggered disasters. Then we focus on the tool for evaluating the adequacy of current disaster risk management, and also to evaluate the readiness and capability of local national institutions to deal with disaster risk. Then we list best practices recommendation, and we also list some regional profiles and programs. And we can say that this benchmarking is designed to be comprehensive, given the following multi-dimensions of disaster risk management: risk exposure, geographic extent, vulnerable elements, and in terms of community or enterprises level to any geographic extent. It's possible to customize it to meet specific dimensions, and it presents its present form covers all the vulnerable elements in general, but may be redesigned to focus on any of the following vulnerabilities: affected population, infrastructure, economy, and environment. The second step, we identified the relevant disaster risk management aspects. We consider that these are 5 very important levels. Of course, it's, as I mentioned before, it's possible to modify it anytime. It's easy system to modify it. So we identified circumstances. We include there different factors and actors that could trigger or induce any type of multi-hazards event. Then we made a complete profile of different types of vulnerabilities, as I mentioned: economic, financial, social. We have also health and disabilities, everything. Then we analyze the aspects of responses, and we define then the recovery aspects and resilient level. And all these 5 different provision levels, they are all the time referring to policy, standards, legislation, human capacity, financial resources, technical staff and content, public education, infrastructure development. Under this, we consider all type of capital investments. Then we go on the first step, where we defined the framework of the case study. So how all these 5 levels will be described and per each case study. And we defined, you see these questions: what type of disaster, caused by what, whom, where, affected area, affected population, affected critical or strategic infrastructure, affected vulnerable groups, what kind of combination of threats, identified critical assets to be protected, identified potential threats based on cascading effect, response efforts, access to sources, knowledge, experience, tools amidst disaster, then use technologies, loss of life, injury, major damage, recovery efforts, major preparedness, and lesson learned. And then we get final, like what changes have been done. So all these questions have been answered within each case study. And each case study referred to one of the pre-identified long-term trends in multi-hazards. In step 4, we made a scoring system. I can provide you the whole tool, scoring system and labeling, because I give only one example. For example, with the scoring system is based on easy pointing from 1 to 3 and delivered based on 3 levels: adequate, basic, and critical. And I can give you an example that for the response level, for example, example 3, 3 points is given for response capacity level, adequate, use of intervention teams in place, use of good technology, specific equipment, adequate crisis communication, situational awareness, applied consistently across well-established technologies, communication. It's all processes are adequate, well prepared. So these are the maximum scoring. So this is the threshold. And in step 4, we collected all these case studies, and we scored all of these case studies in order to outline for each level of response, resilience, recovery, circumstances, and vulnerability, to define a kind of a general network, what will be the best, what should be taken into consideration, and for which we finally we develop within step 6, like the thresholds for the benchmarking. We are mostly interested, as you can see, on the disruptions that can be driven by any multi-hazards, and what kind of effects or what kind of preparedness and prevention approaches should have been taken into consideration or should be taken into consideration. And finally, I'll close that presentation because maybe I'm over this 10 minutes already. That we consider that for the lesson learned, it's the most important is in the decision-making process, it's the planning aspect. As I mentioned, it should be cross-sectoral. Because all these collected examples demonstrate that the performance of emergency services is subject to comprehensive prevention and preparedness, and we perceive expectations also incomplete evidences. So we expect any time that we cannot have a stage of complete availability of any data and knowledge, and we cannot have the top master team of strategic managers or operational capacities within the very moment where it happens, and even we cannot have an access to all possible technologies or resources at the very moment. We have collected those lessons learned also for making better understanding how to mitigate the vulnerability and how can be achieved a kind of a better understanding on how to work with the vulnerability within the ongoing disaster and afterwards, because sometimes these cascading effects can be during the event. It can be one or even longer period, from one day to a longer period, but then we can have in fact quite longer effects on the vulnerability of society, economy, and etc. And this is something that is very difficult to assess and to get practical experience. Maybe COVID-19 is one of the experiences we can assess somehow, and it's difficult based on one case study to develop a kind of a benchmarking model. The most important is to have a leadership and organizational structure and culture for all entities that get involved into the cycle, disaster risk management cycle. We have to assess also the obligation of having sufficient financial and technical resources, and this is something that should be taken into consideration by local and community or regional strategic managers, especially decisions makers, to reduce the region's risk exposure to natural hazards or multi-hazards events. And then we would like very much to promote the benchmarking tool as tool for building the knowledge-based approach of different political decision makers, and also to be used by strategic and crisis managers, and also to be able for that tool to develop their own regional or local benchmarking thresholds, because we offer with that simple benchmarking framework different indicators that can be easily modified. So this is the advance of that tool, that it's a tool that gives you more or less idea how to think and how to process. And that our benchmarking approach also supports the formulation of policy, directives, legislation support. It's very important for development of any soft measures. And these are so-called unregrettable measures, because they can be done without any big investments, but they may concern change of legal environment and change of behavior of the community or different social and economic networks. So thank you for that presentation and for your time and your attention. Hello?
Thank you very much.